Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, all. Please take a seat, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, and good morning. And today, we are releasing our proposal to balance the state budget. And we know that we're releasing this proposal while there are two storms that are swirling around our state, and our budget responds to both. The first storm is a fiscal crisis nearly a decade in the making, where what we saw is under the former administration, state spending in the general fund budget increased by 70% in the 7 years before I took office. While the budget increased by 70% in those 7 years, we also saw economic growth stall, where during that time period, we saw the nation's economy continue to grow while Maryland's economy continued to stay flat. So while we were spending, we were not growing. Emergency COVID money from the federal government papered over a structural deficit that had been warned by experts since 2017. And now, we face the worst fiscal crisis in at least 20 years, one even worse than the Great Recession. The second storm is a stark new policy direction from the Trump-Vance administration that threatens to disrupt Maryland's economy. So in partnership with the General Assembly, it is our responsibility to help the state weather these two storms and emerge stronger. We are guided by a single, clear principle. Build an economy that grows the middle class and gives everyone a pathway to work, wages, and wealth. And the four pillars that we have used as our guideposts and our priorities at the center of this mission are: first, grow the economy; second, strengthen the labor force; third, modernize government; and fourth, fix what's broken in our tax system. None of these things are easy. All of them are necessary. And with this budget, all will get done. So this morning, I will give an overview of why these priorities matter and how we plan on addressing them. First things first, we've got to grow our economy. From 2017 to 2022, the national economy grew by 11%. Maryland's economy grew by just 3%. Now, that lack of growth has very real consequences for our state and for our people. If our economy had been growing more rapidly, if our GDP growth was moving at a higher clip, guess what we would not have inherited? A structural deficit. The problem is, when you have spending increasing by 70% and GDP growing by 3%, you have a problem. One that was long predicted, and one that can only be fixed by growth. If our economy had been growing more rapidly, we could better withstand any headwinds or any challenges that this state might face. So that's why economic growth is our North Star. It's at the center of every single opportunity we hope to seize, at the center of every single hope that we have for the people of this state and the people of this state have for themselves. It's the key to unlock and overcome every challenge that we have. And yesterday, I unveiled our economic agenda. We are channeling $750 million towards economic growth this year. We will invest in growth. I propose $128 million in new targeted and strategic investments towards specific areas that will strengthen our competitiveness. Areas like quantum and cyber and life sciences and aerospace and defense tech. Because Maryland has some of the greatest assets that you could want in the entire country here that are tethered to the state of Maryland. So why our balance sheet does not reflect an investment in those areas, I have no idea, and that changes. Our investments will drive $515 million in economic activity in Maryland and support, create, or retain 2,600 jobs. And our economic strategy is broader than simply addressing one industry or one sector, because you cannot have growth if you're not also investing in the things that make communities worth living in, like safe neighborhoods and safe communities and affordable housing. You cannot have growth if you're not also investing in all the things that make our state so special and making Maryland a place that people want to live and grow and thrive and stay. We need a holistic approach to growth, and that's exactly what the growth agenda helps to provide. That's why in our growth agenda, we also talk about things like preserving record funding for local law enforcement. That's why we're supporting programs to turn more renters into homeowners. That's why we'll continue to invest in priorities that make Maryland safer and more affordable and more competitive, so we can win against our neighbors. And anyone who suggests that we can just cut our way to prosperity is not being honest. And anyone who wants to suggest that you can just tax your way to prosperity is not being honest either. We need to grow. Growth is the answer. The second, we need to strengthen our labor force. When I took office, we learned quickly that the pipeline between Marylanders and opportunity was broken. When you have a situation that there are 2 available jobs for every single person filing for unemployment, you know you have a pipeline issue. And it isn't enough to create jobs if we're not also training Marylanders to be able to fill those jobs. It is not enough to have growth industries if you do not have Marylanders that are prepared to take on the place to help those growth industries grow and thrive inside of the state. So now is the time to be able to equip Marylanders with the skills that they need, not only to compete for the jobs of now, but to compete for the jobs of the future. We have preserved record funding for K-12 schools to ensure Maryland has the best education system in the country, and we are teaching our students how not just to be employees, but we're teaching our students how to be employers, how to lead. And I know we have some of the best four-year institutions in America here in the state of Maryland, something that we are very proud of, but we are going to end this myth that every single one of our students must attend one of them in order to be economically successful. It is not true. So we will not fund like it's true. We are making strategic investments in apprenticeships, strategic investments in trades, and strategic investments in job training. We are building new pipelines to industries of the future like cyber and biotech, and at the same time, we will continue our strong support for childcare so Maryland parents can hold a job and still know that their children are safe as well. Our labor force strategy prioritizes our greatest source of strength: Marylanders, our people. Now, third, we need to modernize government. When we took office, we realized that many structural challenges had gone unaddressed for a very, very long time. Where different agencies were paying different amounts of money for the same IT equipment and software. If I asked a question, how much does it cost to get a state laptop, I should not have to get 7 answers. But this oftentimes is what was happening. Hundreds of state cars were being serviced and maintained, many of them with hardly any miles on them because they weren't being used. But we knew that we had to be able to address these issues because when simple problems go unexamined or unaddressed, that burden will fall on the taxpayers, and we will not accept that. So last week, I announced a new government modernization initiative to help us find ways to save taxpayers money. This push will save us a projected $50 million this year alone, and this push will be the cornerstone of our vision for a government that is more efficient, that is more responsive, and that meets the people of this state where they are. In addition, we will slow the implementation of certain mandated priorities to ensure that all state programs are two things: effective and sustainable. Effective and sustainable. And we also need to make difficult cuts when necessary. We need to rein in spending. We need to tighten our belts. We need to spend wisely. We need to spend for the future. We will propose in this budget $2 billion in total cuts this year. And we have taken a narrow and a targeted approach that focuses on boosting efficiency and delivering results. This was not just across-the-board ideas. That's too lazy for this team. Strategic, targeted, and making sure you're focusing on effectiveness and sustainability. Now, the fourth, we need to fix what's broken in our tax system, because you cannot look at Maryland's tax system and honestly say that it works as it should. I have been all around this state, from Western Maryland to the Eastern Shore, speaking with CEOs and state workers to entrepreneurs. And the one consistent thing that we all agree on is this tax system makes no sense in the state of Maryland. The one consistent thread we continue to hear is how complex it is, how confusing it is, and frankly, for many Marylanders, how deeply unfair the tax system is as well, which also makes us less competitive with our neighbors. And if we are truly fighting for the future, you cannot just simply use the tools of the past. So, this year, we have put forward a common sense package for tax reform that will make taxes simpler, fairer, and pro-growth. And for the third year in a row, we will not raise sales taxes. For the third year in a row, we will not raise property taxes. That we are closing corporate loopholes and help lower the overall corporate tax rate to make Maryland more attractive, to make Maryland more business-friendly, and to stop losing competition with our neighbors. And with this budget, nearly two-thirds of Marylanders will receive a tax cut, and in fact, 82% of Marylanders will either receive a tax cut or see no change to their tax status at all. I'll repeat that again. Two-thirds of Marylanders are going to get a tax cut. 82% of Marylanders will either get a tax cut or see no change to their tax status at all. And Marylanders who have done exceptionally well financially, we're going to be asked to contribute a little bit more, so we can make targeted investments in economic growth and targeted investments in public safety and targeted investments in education. We will be asked to contribute a little bit more so we can have the country's best public schools. We'll be asked to contribute a little bit more so we can have safe streets and making sure we're not laying off police officers. We will be asked to contribute a little bit more to make sure that we have infrastructure that can keep people safe when they go from where they live to where they work, or where they live to where they worship. And we refuse to balance this budget on the backs of working class families. We also feel an obligation to make strong investments in programs and services that Marylanders care about most. And I reject the false choice that says tax reform either drives growth or tax reform limits growth. The binary is not accurate. Our plan makes Maryland the best state in the nation to start and grow in business, while also ensuring that we can make responsible investments in our future. Simpler, fair, pro-growth. That's our vision for common sense tax reform. And one where the vast majority of Marylanders are about to get a tax cut. These are the four big steps that we are taking in partnership. Grow the economy, strengthen the labor force, modernize government, fix what's broken in our tax system. And I want to emphasize, we enter this moment not from a position of weakness, but we enter this moment from a position of strength. Because in partnership with the General Assembly and in partnership with our local leaders, we have now passed 2 consecutive general fund budgets that are smaller than that of the previous year. So yes, when this administration, we've actually made government smaller, not bigger. And that's something that has not happened in nearly a decade. That we have kept the rainy day fund at a higher level than is required by law during both of our first 2 years of office, where I have said and I will continue to say we will maintain a healthy rainy day balance, and any idea that we are somehow going to deplete the rainy day balance, not on our watch. It's too important. And, by the way, if you look at the rainy day balance, as you'll see from the Secretary in a little bit, we're doing it again this year. And at the same time, during that time, during this position of strength that we're coming from, we have now collectively worked together to create more than 60,000 new jobs and seen the unemployment rate in the state of Maryland. When I took the oath of office, the unemployment rate in the state of Maryland, we were ranked 43rd in the country. Now, we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country, going on 14 months in a row. We have delivered historic funding for K-12 education, advanced key priorities laid out in the blueprint, and focused on the fundamentals of reading and math. And every step of the way, we have moved in partnership across parties and across all parts of the state. So, as I turn it over to our DBM Secretary, Secretary Grady, I know that people said when we came into this session that this was that we had a crisis, that we had a fiscal crisis and the largest fiscal crisis that we had seen in 2 decades. But I want to also say to the people of this state, we've seen crisis before, guys. We don't just talk about a fiscal crisis. We saw a crisis when we came on board, and we saw a crisis in violence and homicides, where we saw over an 8-year period how the homicide rate in the state of Maryland had nearly doubled. The non-fatal shooting rate in the state of Maryland did double. How Baltimore City went 8 straight years of 300+ homicides. We know crisis. And we also know that at that moment we chose to do something really unique, and that's work together. And now, not only have we been able to break the back of violent crime that we've seen across our state, Maryland is now amongst the national leaders in a decline in violence and homicides and non-fatal shootings. We know that on March 26th, we saw a crisis when a ship the size of 3 football fields slammed into the iconic Key Bridge. And we saw how collectively we worked together and we were able to respond in a way that the people needed and deserved. We do hard things. We respond to crises. We work together, and we make big things happen for the people of this state. I'm very clear about the storms. I'm also very clear that together we're going to navigate them. And so with that, I'd like to turn over to Budget Secretary Helene Grady, as she's then walked through the details of our budget plan. Madam Secretary.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Governor. And I think we can go one side up. Shane, thanks. So as the governor said, I'm going to walk you through some of the underlying details behind the higher level vision that he articulated so well about this proposed budget that we're introducing to the General Assembly today. So once again, we want to cover just a few key points about how did we get here and just hone in on this a little bit more. As Governor Moore shared, the state budget grew at a significant clip through the pandemic. At the same time, the state's economic growth was stagnant. Since 2017, Maryland's real GDP growth has significantly underperformed national growth, as you see on this chart here. The chart shows that right around 2015, Maryland growth started to dip below United States growth. Around 2017, we came together, and 2017 through 2019, Maryland's growth was essentially flat. The pandemic hit, and both Maryland and the nation dipped. The nation recovered strongly since then, and Maryland has struggled to recover anywhere near the level of the nation since 2021. We're starting to see signs of progress. In December, our colleagues at the Department of Labor reported that real GDP in Maryland grew at the same rate as the nation in Q3 of 2024. Very encouraging progress. They've also reported that Maryland population grew by 46,000 in 2024, which is the most in a while. The next slide talks a little bit about the same picture with regard to employment growth in Maryland. Maryland's total non-farm employment growth also underperformed the nation since 2017, with the gap widening after 2020. The next slide shows a little bit of the implications of this stagnant economic growth on state revenues. As a result of the stagnant economic growth since 2017, state revenues have not kept pace with the costs of delivering services, something our families and businesses can relate to. Pre-pandemic, what you see on the chart is that general fund revenue growth trends hovered around 4% pre-pandemic, spiked to about 13% during those pandemic years as a result of a number of factors related to the pandemic, and since then have come way below pre-pandemic levels. So fiscal 23, we were at just about 1% year-over-year growth in general fund revenue. Fiscal 24 dipped to flat 1% year-over-year growth in general fund revenue, and currently we're projected at only 1.5% growth for fiscal 26, the budget year that we're developing now. To put this in perspective, in the fall of 2022, the Board of Revenue Estimates and the Spending Affordability Committee were forecasting growth of 3.2% in general fund revenue for fiscal 24, the year that just ended last summer. The actual growth was 1%. So since the administration's been in office, we had 4 consecutive revenue write-downs at the Board of Revenue Estimates, all relating to the fact that the stagnant economic growth that had persisted for so many years was really taking a toll on general fund revenue growth to fund state services. Next slide. Next, we're going to review where we've landed with our budget plan in terms of the top line results. Next slide. Hard to overemphasize the magnitude of the challenge. We have taken a once-in-a-20-year fiscal crisis that could have had a devastating impact on services for Marylanders and flipped that into a positive cash balance. Next slide, Shane. The proposed budget specifically flips the projected cash shortfall of $2.95 billion, which was projected by the Department of Legislative Services in December, to a positive cash ending balance of $106 million in fiscal 26. We prioritize key investments for education, public safety, and growing the economy. We've reduced overall general fund operating expenses by $274 million in fiscal 26, or 1%. And last, we've reduced the structural deficit for fiscal 2026 by $2.25 billion. The proposed budget, as the governor mentioned, maintains a rainy day fund balance of 8% of general fund revenues in fiscal 2026. That's just over $2 billion to weather uncertainty. That compares to 5% rainy day fund balance pre-pandemic, for most of history pre-pandemic, and compares to a goal set by the Spending Affordability Committee of 7.5%. The budget reflects a balance of 8%. In the next slide, we're going to move into how the budget supports economic growth. The governor framed eloquently his strategy for economic growth, which is really key to Maryland emerging stronger. The vision for economic growth in this budget is a broad one, and we're going to cover some of the tactics behind our vision for economic growth that are exhibited in the budget that's being introduced today. On the next slide, we'll talk about this broad approach includes a focus on prioritizing investments in competitiveness, safety, and affordability. We have proposed new money for commercial hubs and industries of the future, like life sciences, IT, aerospace, and defense, as you heard yesterday. We maintain a record $122 million in funding for local law enforcement, as well as other investments in public safety, and our budget invests in a clean economy to create jobs and lower costs. In the next slide, we go a little bit deeper into the $128 million in key target industry investments that were unveiled yesterday by the governor. Just a few examples include $27.5 million in the budget to support the Capital of Quantum initiative based at College Park. This is a public-private partnership catalyzing $1 billion in investments and cementing Maryland as a global leader in quantum information science and technology. The budget includes $20 million for two initiatives at MEDCO. The first is a strategic infrastructure revolving fund, and the second is our Build Our Future program. These are both recent programs at MEDCO that we are capitalizing at greater levels in the fiscal 26 budget. The next one is a recapitalization of the state's Sunny Day Fund, which has long been dormant. We are recapitalizing with a commitment of $25 million for fiscal 26 and a new focus on bringing new businesses to Maryland, focus on attraction as opposed to retention. And last, the budget includes for fiscal 26 $15 million on top of $15 million in fiscal 25 for TradePoint to support TradePoint Atlantic Container Terminal Project. This is a 168-acre redevelopment. The Port of Baltimore slated to break ground in fall of 2025 and projected to generate $1 billion in private investment. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about our investments in public safety. The budget maintains, as I said, a record of $122 million in local aid for police protection. Additionally, the budget increases funding for the Department of Juvenile Services, including $4.2 million targeted to expand evidence-based community services run by DJS. Additionally, we are investing $3 million to reopen Catoctin Treatment Center in Western Maryland. Next, we want to talk a little bit about our investments in a clean economy. The proposed budget doubles the funding for initiatives to support the climate pollution reduction plan from $90 million in our current fiscal 25 budget to $180 million in fiscal 26. Additionally, we're able to do this record doubling of investment in climate pollution actions, pollution reduction actions, even while we're also able to make strategic use of some of the balances within our Strategic Energy Investment Fund to support other priority economic growth investments in fiscal 25. Next slide goes a little bit deeper into this $180 million that we're proposing to the legislature that we invest in a clean economy. We are targeting the $180 million accordingly, $50 million for solar development on state property, $80 million for solar and geothermal development on public facilities, and $50 million for block grants to school districts to support solar and geothermal heat pumps on existing schools and construction of new net zero schools. Our next section, we want to talk a little bit about how our investments in strengthening the labor force are reflected through the budget. This is aligned specifically with the economic growth agenda. The budget reflects key investments in the labor force to enable the growth that we envision and also to ensure that all Marylanders are positioned to participate in that growth. Some examples of investment in our workforce initiatives include record funding for pre-K through 12 education, investing $9.7 billion into Maryland's public schools. More than $400 million for child care scholarships to serve nearly 43,000 children this year, up from just over 16,000 children as recently as 2022. And an additional $5 million for the Employment Advancement Right Now program, also called EARN, at the Department of Labor, that supports apprenticeship and workforce training programs for target industries and sectors. This is a 62% increase to the EARN program, which is a program that is proven by studies to show that for every dollar invested, a $17 return on investment based on the value of earnings differentials for participants. The next slide shows by illustration the record education funding that's reflected in the fiscal 26 budget. Despite the fiscal crisis that we're managing, this is a stark illustration of Maryland's strong and continued commitment to pre-K through 12 education funding. Just under $10 billion in the fiscal 26 budget, with general funds at just over $7 billion and blueprint funds at $2.4 billion next year. The next slide shows you a little bit of the trend on our investment in child care scholarship program. Again, really core to strengthening our workforce. General fund expense for the child care scholarship program is more than $400 million per year in fiscal 25 and fiscal 26, again, slated to support almost 43,000 children. As recently as 2 years ago, the state was funding just $59 million into this program. And this is occurring while those general fund revenues were being written down over these last 2 years. However, this is a critical priority area to our economic growth agenda, and so we have reprioritized within the budget in fiscal 25 and again in fiscal 26 to be able to sustain these service levels. Last, this chart just gives a sense of how all these investments together are really focused on continuous improvement in our labor force participation, which is really necessary to enable the growth that we envision. Again, you can see from the chart that historically Maryland has relatively high labor force participation rate and continues to, but that we have struggled since pandemic to recover to pre-pandemic levels at the rate that the nation has. We do believe that this budget will fuel further growth in this key metric. Next section, we're going to talk a little bit about what does it mean for us to be focused on modernizing government. How do we propose to pay for all this exciting and important investment in economic growth? One key way is through redirection of funds from other areas to these key priorities. First and foremost, the budget cuts $2 billion in spending through cost reduction and cost-saving measures. Our budget ensures that state funding returns to levels that match our balance sheets. As we were preparing this budget, everything was on the table. We pursued a comprehensive review, and we are including here just a few key examples of some of the areas where we are looking to trim back or to shift resources. First and foremost, the governor described in detail the Modernizing State Government initiative that was launched last week, where we are expecting to eliminate at least $50 million of wasteful spending across state agencies due to inefficient or duplicative operations. Second, we are preserving $141 million in fiscal 26 alone for future blueprint investments by improving implementation efforts. Some other examples include the fact that we are proposing to offset some of our significant growth in Medicaid expenses to hospitals and insurers, as most states do. We are also proposing to increase the efficiency within our developmental disabilities administration services to ensure that more Marylanders receive quality health care. Just a little bit of detail on each of these. The Government Modernization Initiative, as was announced last week, through this, we are really excited to have outside expertise on board, working side by side with our agencies to help us capture at least $50 million in general fund savings over the next year, focused primarily and at first on IT, real estate procurement, and fleet management. Next, the state is redirecting spending for underutilized or underperforming programs towards higher priority programs. You will see dozens of examples throughout the state budget of us doing this and proposing these changes. Just a couple here on the slide to give you a sense. The two-generation model at the Department of Human Services, we are proposing to eliminate this program, which saves $950,000. This is an approach to ending intergenerational poverty through policy changes, coordination on services, and focus on best practices. The model as set up at DHS has not produced measurable results, so we are proposing to shift our efforts and our resources to other initiatives focused on similar outcomes, such as the Enough program. Tree Solutions Now is another example of a budgeted mandate for funding to the Department of Agriculture of $2.5 million per year. The Department of Agriculture is not able to spend $2.5 million per year for multiple years now to plant trees on agricultural land. So we are in agreement that reprioritizing $2 million of that mandate towards our other economic growth priorities is the right decision. A couple of examples at the Department of Commerce. The Global Gateway Initiative is a program, again, that shows little measurable results, and we are proposing to sunset. And the Innovation Initiative Program at Commerce. This is a program where the state provides a match to philanthropy to attract world-class faculty researchers to our institutions. It's been a successful program, but has been funded beyond what they are able to spend in most years. Fund balance has built up, so we're proposing to take back a piece of that funding each year. The next slide talks a little bit about some of our larger policy reform proposals. As part of this plan, the administration tackled very challenging policy reviews with an eye toward ensuring effectiveness of state investment and sustainability. The first example we want to talk a little bit about is around strengthening blueprint implementation. We saw on an earlier slide the administration's clear support for pre-K through 12 education. However, the administration does intend to propose adjustments to the blueprint, as the governor described, that will help preserve $2.5 billion through fiscal 2030 to support future investment in education. Some of these measures were just recently endorsed by the AIB over the past week. We see this as a significant step toward shoring up the Blueprint Fund while improving on its execution and focusing on the results for kids. Next, we have a chart that just illustrates our efforts to rein in a bit, in a very reasonable manner, we believe, state funding for higher education spending, and particularly our four-year institutions of higher education. The slide shows that we've had significant growth in state funding for our four-year institutions of higher ed since fiscal 22. It is not sustainable for the general fund to continue to support these levels of growth going forward, and we are proposing just a slight bending of the cost curve next year that we believe is fair and reasonable for the institutions to manage. The next slide talks a little bit about our Medicaid expense expansion over the last 2 years and sharing in the cost for this expansion with our hospitals and insurers, as many states do. The 26 budget proposes to increase the Medicaid deficit assessment, which is an assessment on those hospitals and insurers, by $100 million annually, back to the level it was in fiscal 2016. This is specifically to offset the state's costs for Medicaid expansion, which have grown by $1 billion in general funds, or 26% since just fiscal 23. Again, while state revenues were being written down due to stagnant economic growth. So again, we're feeling this crunch on the general fund. This is one of the effective mechanisms for us to spread these costs more broadly. Another example within our health services area where state costs have grown at an unsustainable rate with important new investments designed to strengthen providers and improve service delivery is within our Developmental Disabilities Administration at the Department of Health. The 26 budget proposal will help the DDA build network capacity, provide more equitable services, and reinstate program integrity. As you can see from the chart, state general fund spending for developmental disability services has grown significantly from $850 million in fiscal 23 to nearly $1.5 billion over just 2 years. The administration is proposing cost containment of just over $200 million next year to bring our funding back to the fiscal 24 level, which is near historic levels relative to history. While the actions will be difficult for some constituencies, this is one of the most difficult proposals in the budget that we're bringing the General Assembly. We have targeted actions that better leverage federal funding and align Maryland's program more closely with federal guidance and practices in other states. Additionally, our budget proposal preserves much of the progress made since fiscal 23 into these critical investments to support the developmental disabilities community. Next, I just want to flag that the budget includes very significant investments within transportation budget, including promoting safe and reliable transportation. This is core and critical to the economic growth agenda, and significant enhancements throughout MDOT in this budget. Next, I just want to go into a little bit of detail on the last pillar or leg of the stool for this budget strategy, making our tax system simple, fair, and pro-growth. We have put forward a responsible plan to make taxes simpler, fairer, and pro-growth. The revenues we raise from these reforms will enable our investment in a stronger, growing, and more vibrant economy. Nearly 2/3 of Marylanders, as the governor said, will receive a tax cut, and we've targeted tax relief to those with low and middle incomes. 22% of Marylanders will see no change under this income tax reform plan. For the third year in a row, as the governor mentioned, we have avoided raising the sales tax or the property tax in the state of Maryland. Additionally, we intend to cut the corporate tax rate to entice more businesses and drive growth. On the next slide, we have a little bit more detail around our income tax proposal in particular, which is really the centerpiece of the reform plan. We are presenting the General Assembly with a bold proposal to reform the personal income tax. What we are proposing to make this personal income tax system simpler includes, first and foremost, a doubling of the standard deduction, while also removing or eliminating itemized deductions. This ensures that all taxpayers are treated equally and puts us on better competitive ground with our neighboring states with regard to the standard deduction, which is the best tool for providing broad tax relief for all Maryland taxpayers. Additionally, we are proposing to consolidate the bottom 4 income tax brackets on our current bracket schedule at a 4.7% rate, which is slightly below the 4.75% rate today for the 4th of those lowest brackets. Alongside this income tax proposal, but within the umbrella of making our tax code simpler, we are proposing to eliminate the inheritance tax in a way that is revenue neutral by also changing the exemption on our estate tax. Maryland's the only state in the country that taxes both inheritance and estate, and we're proposing to change that. We believe our tax proposal will also make things fairer. In that regard, we are proposing to expand tax relief by eliminating the standard deduction penalty and the child tax credit limit that exists today, both of which make tax code unfair for lower income families in Maryland, particularly relative to other states. We're proposing additionally to add 2 new tax rates at $500,000 for single filers at a rate of 6.25% and $1 million also for single filers at a rate of 6.5%. You might ask, how is that fair to add new tax brackets with higher rates on the upper income wealthiest Marylanders? It turns out that Maryland's highest earning households currently pay the lowest share of their income in Maryland taxes, both state and local taxes. According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, households earning more than $700,000 pay 9% of their income in state and local taxes in Maryland. Households earning less than $30,000 pay considerably more at 9.6%. Our proposal seeks to level those differences. On the next slide, talk a little bit about some of the other components of the revenue package, which include lowering the corporate tax rate by implementing combined reporting to close tax loopholes and broaden the corporate base. We're proposing to increase the sports wagering tax rate from 15% to 30%. Seems like a big jump, but many of our neighboring states are significantly higher than 15% today. Pennsylvania is at 36%, and New York is even higher, north of 50%. We're proposing to increase the table game tax rate from 20% to 25%, and effective fiscal 27, 18 months from now, we're proposing to increase the cannabis tax rate from 9% to 15%. Governor Moore's fiscal 26 general fund tax reform package raises $987 million in fiscal 26 to invest specifically in this economic growth agenda in Maryland. This chart just shows on a donut chart the composition of that $987 million next year. What you see from the dark blue bars is that the bulk of the revenue is raised through the personal income tax proposal at $819 million. That consists of $691 million from the elimination of itemized deductions and changes to brackets, along with $128 million from a new capital gains surcharge of 1% for households earning over $350,000. That capital gains surcharge, which I might have missed on the earlier slide, is currently proposed to exist for 4 years with a sunset after 4 years, and the revenue raised from the surcharge is earmarked specifically for the economic growth agenda, including the $128 million that was rolled out yesterday as our proposed agenda for fiscal 26. Additionally, on the donut chart, you can see the next largest portion of the package is around the gaming taxes, with $95 million projected from increasing the sports wagering tax rate and $31 from increasing the table game tax rate. In addition, we are proposing to change 2 current state tax credits that are on the books. We're proposing to eliminate the state funding for enterprise zone tax credit. In 2022, DLS studied this tax credit program and found a difficult time connecting the credit to outcomes for individuals living in the distressed areas for whom the program is intended to help. Additionally, we are proposing a reduction to the student debt relief tax credit, which we have found through MHEC's study is not currently producing the results that have been intended. In particular, the credit is benefiting many high-income households. We are proposing to reduce that credit next year and have MHEC work with us on a redesign of that program to better target the resources. Not in the chart are the out-year changes, including the corporate income tax rate, which we're proposing to cut from 8.25% to 7.99%. That's a 26 basis point cut over 2 years beginning in fiscal 28, commensurate with closing the combined reporting loophole. Additionally, we are projecting to raise $90 million beginning in fiscal 27 from the change to the cannabis tax rate that I described earlier. So this covers the details behind this comprehensive budget that we're proposing today to the General Assembly. Governor, before I turn back to you, I hope I can indulge for just 1 minute to express my deep appreciation for the entire staff at DBM, especially our operating and capital budget staffs and the staff within the Secretary's office. This has been a monumental challenge that the staff took on head-on about 8 months ago with unrelenting effort. The staff on both budget teams have poured their souls into this work. They're motivated by mission and also their own commitment to public service, and I have never been so proud of a team. I also hope that they all feel very proud of the extent to which they see their own analysis influencing various components of this comprehensive package.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary, and I echo your thanks to the entire DBM team and to this entire administration just for the countless hours of work that has gone into this, literally toiling over the details, every line, every single initiative, making sure that it wasn't just reinforced with data, but also that it got us to our longer goal. And Before we do take questions, I do want to spend a moment just to speak directly to Marylanders. And to all Marylanders, I just want to say thank you. Because I have had, both myself and the Lieutenant Governor, we've had the honor of just traveling all across this state. Tens of thousands of miles, having hundreds of hours of conversations with so many of you about your hopes and your dreams and your aspirations, and you all were the ones who invited us into your homes. You're the ones who invited us into your union halls and your libraries and your schools, and you shared your concerns. You shared your concerns about how prices just seem too high. You shared your concerns about how you wanted to be able to buy a home, but you couldn't find one that was affordable. You shared your concerns that you just wanted to feel safe in communities and safe in neighborhoods. You shared your concerns that you want this to be the state that wins because you want this to be the state that you plan on staying in. And I want to let you know that we heard you loud and clear. That for those who felt like opportunity felt just a little bit too far out of reach, that we hope that with this budget proposal and with the work of this administration, that you see that this is a budget proposal that both can address the structural challenges that this state has been dealing with for a very long time, but also unlocks the opportunities that each and every one of you have for yourselves and for your families and for your futures. And I do know that not everyone will agree with our proposal. In fact, I've heard some feedback that some people who haven't even read it don't agree with the proposal, which is fascinating. But I do want to say this, that if our views do conflict, I will always be direct with you about where I stand. I will always be transparent with you about how we got there. And I will always reach out a hand to make sure that anyone who is serious about working together to advance the interests of the people of this state, in me, you have a partner. That is my promise. Because I do know that in this moment, and in this moment of real challenge, that we can and we will win, because that's what we do. So, thank you so much. And with that, I'll open it up to questions from the media. And Madam Secretary. Yeah.
Governor, you had consistently said that your bar was high for new revenues. Does the gravity of this budget crisis lower that bar?
No, I mean, the bar is still high. The bar is high for me on revenue adjustments now. It was yesterday. It will be tomorrow. It will be as long as I'm the governor of the state of Maryland. And we knew about this budget crisis. This budget crisis has been projected since 2017. So it's not a new thing. And we understood the type of crisis that we are entering into. And I think that's also why we were very deliberate about how we were going to make sure that we could present a balanced budget. And so the first thing that we went after is we said, how can we focus on efficiencies? How can we make government more efficient? How can we look at our own systems and say, what are the things that we need to look at internally to make sure that we are more efficient and really have a state government that meets people where they are? We said, how can we first focus on cuts? And for the things that were both effective and sustainable, we will invest in it. And for things that were not effective and sustainable, we will stop investing in it. And we had to be very disciplined and very sober about that. And that's why this budget reflected, $2 billion worth of cuts. That is a real number. And so when I said the bar was high, I still meant it. And my bar is still very high. Because we will continue to look at other ways of continuing to make sure we're advancing the interests of the people of the state of Maryland. But all of those decisions all focused around one word: growth. Because if our economy were growing at a faster clip, we would not have inherited a fiscal crisis. The reason we inherit is because this economy is not growing. And so that continues to be the North Star for how we're thinking about that.
Governor, you talked about economic growth and how this budget relies on that. What gives you confidence that this will work? And Where else do you see it working that you think it's going to work here in Maryland?
Yeah, it's and great question, because one of the things that we did was we took counsel and advice from every single corner and every single sector. I mean, you'll see in order to get to the final conclusions that we met with the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus, right? We met with the Chamber of Commerce and we met with the Fair Funding Coalition. We met with everybody and anybody who would be willing to say, here's an idea, here's a thought, here are things that we can work into and incorporate. And that also included best practices that we saw from around the country. Secretary Grady highlighted one point. We looked at things like why Maryland was the only state in this country that has both an inheritance tax and an estate tax. It made no sense. And so by being able to understand what other states were doing, that gave us an understanding of saying, well, what do we need to adjust in the state of Maryland to make sure that we can have a tax code that is simpler, fair, and pro-growth, and for the vast majority of Marylanders, lower. And so we were able to really spend time and really think through what are the best practices that we're seeing, what are some of the worst practices that we're seeing, and how do we use all the information that we are then taking in and processing to come to one that we think is going to put Maryland on the best path to long-term success.
Question about Maryland's economic growth. Maryland has always lagged a little bit behind the federal government, some of our neighbors, but has particularly lagged following the pandemic. What is it, in your opinion, that is specific to Maryland that has caused that drag in growth in Maryland?
There's no there's no strategy. I oftentimes come back to military analogies because that's my background and my training. It's seriously like screaming, "Take the hill," and having no idea where the hill is. That's kind of what we've done here in the state of Maryland, where we've got these remarkable assets in the state of Maryland. That Maryland is the home of things like the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command and NIST and APL and the future home of the FBI. Like, Maryland has all these assets here. But if you look at our balance sheet, I couldn't tell you that they were priorities. I couldn't tell you there's an investment strategy around that. And that's why I think this budget is so different. Because this budget says we are going to make strategic investments in things that we have a unique opportunity to win in. And I think about, and going back to the question of best practices, I think about Massachusetts. Massachusetts, decades ago, decided, they said, you know what, we are the home of Harvard, we're the home of MIT. Why are we not investing in biotech? And they made a strategic investment. They made a strategic decision, we're going to invest in biotech. And guess what Massachusetts is right now? The national leader in biotech. Kentucky said, listen, we think that the ball is moving towards EV battery technology. We want to be able to be a leader in EV battery technology. So Kentucky started investing in EV battery technology. And I say this with all due respect to my friend Andy Bashir, besides the bourbon, I'm not sure why exactly they should be the leader in EV battery technology, but they sure are. They made a choice. The problem with Maryland is that we have not made a choice. We've oftentimes leveraged our investments on things like the things that have been the historical legacy industries within the state of Maryland, the EDs, the feds, and the meds, all things that are important and all things that we have to protect as an economy. But at the same time, if we are not leveraging life sciences in Maryland, if we're not leveraging IT in Maryland, aerospace and defense tech, then what are we doing? And so I think part of it is that we can't just simply be settled with being a blue chip economy that kind of just tracks along with the S&P. We've got to be an economy that actually makes bets, that makes investments, because that's the kind of growth mentality that's going to give us the long-term ROI that I think the people of this state deserve, and it's going to help to solve a lot of these other challenges that we inherited, but that we are focused on fixing.
One of the main things we get from viewers as we run these stories on the budget is what happened to the surplus. So I will give you a chance to answer.
So let's be clear, we did not inherit a surplus. We inherited a structural deficit. There was no structural surplus. And in fact, the Department of Legislative Services has been calling for a structural deficit since 2017. COVID money is not a structural surplus. Federal dollars that came into the states, billions of dollars that came into the states, did not represent a structural surplus in any way, shape, or form. It basically was just one-time money, one-time funding. But that's not structural, because you could have one-time money that comes on board. If I am spending way more than my means, and someone hands me a $100 check, that does not now mean my financial problems are over. You got to make sure you're curtailing the spending and increasing the income. That's how you address the structural deficit that we inherited. And I know there's a lot of conversations about who did what and what person was responsible for this or that. I do want to be clear. I don't spend my time pointing fingers. I spend my time pointing direction. That I'm focused on the future. That I know what I inherited. I know the challenges that this state faces. I know the fiscal crisis that is the largest fiscal crisis in 20 years that this state has seen, that has been 10 years in the making. I got it. I don't need to be educated about it, and I have no desire of playing the fight of yesterday, because I'm focused on tomorrow, and I'm focused on leading our state to a better place.
Tax increases, you're saying on 1/3 of Marylanders, which is not an insignificant number. Do you worry at all, because those are high earners, about the potential for the league to go to Virginia, to Pennsylvania, and sort of take some of that money that you're looking for? What do you do as you kind of plan this out over the next 10, 15 years?
Yeah, thanks. I want to be clear. Yeah. So one, I want to correct that. It's not 1/3. It's actually 2/3 of Marylanders are actually receiving a tax cut. 82% of Marylanders are either going to receive a tax cut or no change at all.
So about 18%, which is not an insignificant number.
It is not. It is not. But we also want to be clear on that. The people who will be really taking on the lion's share of the increase are people who are making over $700,000 a year. These are people who have done, there's certain Maryland, we've done pretty well living in Maryland. We like Maryland, and we've benefited. Our lives have benefited because of we are here in the state of Maryland. And I also know that for those of us who that is going to hit, that I'm okay with spending a little bit more if it means that I can have the best schools in this country. I'm okay with spending just a little bit more if it means that I can have safe streets. I'm okay with spending a little bit more if it means that I can have investments in infrastructure and roads and bridges. And so, yes, that is the top 1% are the only ones in the state who will be paying a little bit more. But really what that represents is that about 5% of the state, people making over $700,000 a year, they're the ones taking on a lion's share of this. The vast majority of the state of Maryland are about to get a tax cut. 2/3 of Marylanders are about to get a tax cut. 82% of Marylanders are either going to get a tax cut or see no change at all.
Thank you. One last question.
Okay. Thanks, guys.